She woke up to the faint light of the early morning, the cold air biting through the thin blanket that barely covered her small frame. Her room was barely a room at all, a corner of the house that had been left to her when everyone else claimed their space. The walls were cracked, and the paint was peeling. The wooden floor beneath her was rough and splintered. Yet, she tried to make it feel like her own. She had placed a small photograph of a landscape she had once seen in a magazine and a tiny plant that seemed to survive against all odds on the windowsill. It was her little attempt to create some comfort in a life that offered very little. She rose slowly, her feet touching the cold floor. She paused for a moment, staring at the reflection in the mirror across the room. She was thin, her hair tangled and dull from lack of proper care, and her eyes, large and dark, carried the weight of a childhood that had never been gentle. Yet there was a spark there, a quiet resilience that no hardship could fully extinguish. She knew that today would be another long day, another day of struggle, yet somehow she had to keep going. There was no one to care if she stopped. Her mother's voice echoed from the other room, sharp and filled with irritation. "Why are you still in bed? Get up. You are not going to earn anything by lying there. And remember, you are not my daughter. Don't forget that. You have no place here." The words hit her like stones, heavy and cruel. She flinched, but did not reply. There was no reply that could ever soften the sting of such rejection. Her mother's bitterness had been like this for as long as she could remember, a constant reminder that she was unwanted, unclaimed, and unloved. She dressed quickly, pulling on the same worn-out clothes she had been wearing for weeks. The fabric was thin, patched in several places, but it was all she had. She went into the kitchen to grab what little food there was. Breakfast was a slice of stale bread and some leftover porridge. She ate quietly, her eyes downcast, wishing she could disappear or melt into the walls so she would not have to face the world that seemed determined to reject her. Once she had eaten, she left the house and stepped into the narrow, crowded streets of her neighborhood. The air smelled of smoke, dust, and unwashed bodies. Children ran past, laughing, playing, while she moved quietly among them, a shadow that nobody noticed. She had learned long ago not to draw attention to herself. Being invisible was sometimes the only protection she had. From the cruelty of others, she made her way to the small store where she worked, earning what little she could. It was not much, barely enough to buy food or help pay for the small room she rented. She spent long hours cleaning, organizing, and serving, always with a polite smile, though inside she felt exhausted and hollow. Some customers were kind, giving her small compliments or extra coins, but most were indifferent or dismissive. Still, she endured it all silently because survival demanded endurance. After work, she often wandered the streets, not wanting to return to the house that had never truly been home. She would sit by the river for hours, watching the water flow, thinking about a life that might be kinder, imagining a place where someone might care for her, where she could feel safe. These moments of solitude were her sanctuary, the one place she could dream without interruption. She had friends, but they were few. Those who tried to get close often drifted away, unable to understand the heaviness she carried. She had learned not to depend on anyone. Trust was dangerous, and disappointment was almost certain. And yet, despite all of this, she remained polite, soft-spoken, and willing to help anyone who asked. It was a quiet strength she carried, though few noticed it. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in shades of orange and purple, she walked back home, carrying a small bag of groceries she had saved money to buy. She hoped tonight would be different, that maybe her mother would soften, but deep down she knew better. When she opened the door, her mother's eyes narrowed. "You took too long," she snapped. "I said you are not my daughter. Stop pretending you belong here." The girl swallowed her fear and nodded quietly, placing the groceries on the counter and retreating to her small corner. Her heart ached, but she had learned to keep her pain inside. She had no choice but to carry it alone. Night fell, and the cold crept into her bones. She lay on the floor, wrapped in her thin blanket, listening to the sounds of the house, the creaking of the walls, the distant barking of dogs, the soft murmur of neighbors talking. She thought about the future, about a life where she might feel wanted, about a place where someone could look at her not with disdain or rejection, but with care. She closed her eyes, letting herself imagine warmth, comfort, and safety, even if only for a few moments. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. Every day was a battle against hunger, exhaustion, and the sharp words that cut deeper than any physical pain. Yet through it all, she held on to hope, fragile and flickering though it was. She kept moving forward, taking small steps toward survival and perhaps one day, toward freedom. Every kind word from a stranger, every small act of compassion, became a lifeline. She treasured them, storing them in her heart like precious jewels. Despite the harshness of her life, she remained quietly observant of the world around her. She noticed the small joys others took for granted, the laughter of children, the aroma of fresh bread, the beauty of the sunrise. These small details reminded her that the world was not entirely cruel. There could still be moments of beauty and kindness. She clung to these moments, using them as fuel to keep moving forward. One particularly harsh winter day, she had nowhere to go and almost no food. She wandered the streets, shivering, feeling the sting of the cold wind on her bare hands. Every door she knocked on was closed to her. Every person she asked for help looked away. And yet even in that moment of despair, she refused to give up entirely. She found a small, sheltered spot near the market, huddled under a pile of discarded blankets, and waited for the night to pass. She reminded herself that survival was all that mattered in these quiet moments. Alone in the cold, she thought of the life she could build if only she were given a chance. She imagined herself studying, learning new skills, finding work that allowed her to stand on her own feet. She dreamed of a home where she was valued and respected, where she could rest without fear of being pushed away. These dreams kept her going, even when the world seemed determined to crush her spirit as she drifted off to sleep that night. Wrapped in her meager blankets, she whispered a promise to herself. She would survive. She would rise above the pain, the rejection, and the loneliness. She would find a way to prove that she was not defined by the cruel words of others. Somewhere in the world, she believed, there must be people who could see her worth. People who could offer the love and care she had never known. And she would keep searching until she found them, because giving up was never an option for her. She had to hold on, if only to honor the quiet strength she had nurtured all her life. She stepped out into the cold morning air, the streets still quiet, carrying the small bag of food she had managed to buy with the little money she earned. Her body was tired, her limbs sore from the constant work and lack of proper rest. But her mind was alert, scanning every corner and every person as she walked. She had learned long ago that danger often came in quiet ways, in the form of someone offering help that was not truly help, or someone whose smile hid ill intentions. She moved carefully, keeping to the edges of the streets, avoiding the groups of boys who often caused trouble, and steering clear of the busy market areas where people's eyes were indifferent or hostile. Hunger gnawed at her stomach, but she ignored it, knowing that if she panicked or rushed, she might end up in a worse situation. Her life had taught her patience and survival, and she clung to it like a shield. Her first stop was a small workshop at the edge of the town, where she could earn a few coins by cleaning and organizing. The owner was an older man, gruff but fair, and he had come to expect her diligence. She moved quickly, sweeping the floors, washing the tools, and tidying the small workspace. She said very little, letting her work speak for her. He occasionally threw her a brief smile, the only recognition she had grown accustomed to in months. The work was hard, and the hours long, but it provided her with some small sense of stability. She took pride in the simple act of contributing, of being useful. Even if it meant her body ached and her hands were rough and calloused, she knew that every coin she earned was another step away from complete helplessness, another piece of the fragile independence she was building. After the work was done, she often wandered through the town, not yet ready to return home. The streets were starting to fill with people, children laughing and running in the dust, shopkeepers calling out to passersby, and vendors shouting the prices of fruits and vegetables. The noise was overwhelming, but she navigated it carefully. Focusing on the patterns she had learned, the way people moved, the areas that were safe, the places where she could rest for a few moments without being noticed. She would find small acts of kindness in the most unlikely places. A woman might hand her an extra piece of bread from the market stall, or a shopkeeper might offer a small job for an hour's wage. These moments, though brief, reminded her that there was still some goodness in the world. They became tiny lifelines, little reasons to keep moving forward despite the weight she carried. One day, she was walking down a narrow alley. She noticed a man struggling with a cart that had tipped over. Without thinking, she rushed to help, lifting the heavier end with all her strength. The man looked surprised, then grateful. "Thank you, girl." Most people would just pass by. He handed her a few coins, and though it was not much, it was enough to buy a small meal. She thanked him quietly, feeling a flicker of warmth in her chest. Moments like these reminded her that even in her harsh world, she could make a difference, even in small ways. Despite these small victories, life remained perilous. There were days when she had nowhere to go, nights when she had to find shelter wherever she could, often sharing the cold ground with other unfortunate souls. The wind cut through her clothes, and hunger made her bones ache. Illness was always a threat, and without proper care, even a simple fever could become dangerous. She learned to ration her energy, to hide her suffering, and to survive quietly, always hoping for a better tomorrow. Sometimes, she would find herself in trouble through no fault of her own. One afternoon, while collecting discarded goods to sell, a group of men approached, suspicious and hostile. They accused her of stealing, though she had done nothing wrong. She tried to explain, but her voice trembled, and her pleas fell on deaf ears. She was forced to run, her heart pounding, feet scraping against the rough pavement. The fear stayed with her long after she had escaped, a reminder that the world was not safe, that every day carried new threats. Even in these moments, she refused to give in to despair. She remembered the promise she had whispered to herself long ago, that she would survive, that she would find a place where she could belong. She held on to that thought, using it to push herself forward, to keep searching for safety, for care, for a chance to prove her worth. At night, she often sat near the river, letting the water reflect her thoughts and fears. She watched as the city lights danced on the surface, imagining a life that was kinder, imagining a place where someone would notice her struggles and help her rise. She thought about the small acts of kindness she had experienced, and she believed, against all odds, that there were people in the world who could see her value, even if her own family could not. She began to plan for the future in quiet ways. She saved a few coins here and there, kept track of any opportunity that might lead to work, and carefully watched the behaviors of those around her, learning who could be trusted and who could not. She was becoming more resourceful, more aware, more capable of navigating the dangers that surrounded her. Each day was a lesson, each challenge a teacher. And she absorbed it all with a mix of fear and determination. Her health suffered, as it often did, but she never allowed it to stop her completely. Hunger and exhaustion were constant companions, but she learned to endure them with a grim sort of grace. She knew that if she allowed herself to collapse, there would be no one to catch her, no one to care. Her survival depended entirely on her own strength, her own cunning, her own refusal to surrender. One particularly rainy day, she found herself soaked to the bone, shivering in the downpour. Trying to protect a bundle of clothes she had managed to acquire from the rain, people hurried past, not noticing her, not caring. She found shelter under a small awning, pressing herself against the wall, feeling the cold seep into her skin. She was miserable, alone, and yet even in that misery, she refused to give up. She would find warmth eventually, food eventually, safety eventually. Somehow, some way, she would survive. As evening fell and the streets began to empty, she walked slowly back toward the tiny room she rented, her body aching from the day's labors, her spirit weighed down by the constant struggle. Yet, she felt a quiet pride. She had made it through another day, had protected herself from danger, had earned something to eat. It was not a life of comfort or ease, but it was life, and she clung to it fiercely. She remembered her mother's cruel words as she lay down to sleep that night, the echo of rejection still ringing in her ears. but she also remembered the small kindnesses she had received. The people who had helped her even in passing, the brief moments of beauty and laughter she had witnessed. These memories became her armor, a fragile but vital protection against despair. She drifted into sleep, cold and hungry, yet with a flicker of hope that perhaps one day things could be different, that she might find a place where she was valued, safe, and loved. And in that hope, she found the strength to face another day. She had been wandering the streets longer than usual that day, her stomach gnawing with hunger, her clothes damp from the light drizzle that had begun earlier. She moved slowly, watching the people around her, noticing the way they hurried past without acknowledging her presence. She was used to it by now, used to the feeling of invisibility that seemed to follow her everywhere. Yet, she kept going, hoping that maybe, just maybe, something different might happen. As she rounded a busy street corner, she saw a commotion near the entrance of a large office building. A man in a crisp suit had dropped a folder full of papers, and they scattered across the wet pavement. People rushed past, ignoring the incident, stepping over the scattered documents. Without thinking, she moved closer, crouching down and carefully picking up the papers, arranging them neatly and handing them back to the man. He looked down at her, startled. For a moment, his eyes softened, a look of genuine surprise crossing his face. "Thank you," he said, his voice calm but filled with something she could not quite place. She nodded quietly, shrinking back a little, afraid that she had done something wrong by approaching him. He didn't move away, though. Instead, he bent slightly and spoke again, this time with a hint of curiosity. "You didn't have to do that. Most people would have just walked past." Her heart raced. Nobody had ever said something like that to her before. She managed a small, polite smile, muttering, "It's okay. I just wanted to help." She expected him to dismiss her, to return to his business, but instead, he studied her for a moment, and she felt, for the first time in a long while, that someone was really seeing her, not with judgment, not with dismissal, but with genuine attention. Over the next few days, she kept thinking about that moment. Something about the man had left a lasting impression. It was unusual, the way he had paused and actually acknowledged her actions. She tried to push the thought away, reminding herself that people like him had no reason to care about someone like her. Yet a small spark of hope began to grow inside her. It's fragile but undeniable. One evening, as she was collecting scraps near the marketplace, she heard her name called softly. Turning, she saw the man from the office standing a few steps away. He held a small bag in his hand. "I thought you might need this," he said, offering it to her. Inside were some dry clothes, food, and a blanket. She stared at him, speechless. She had not expected such a gesture. Slowly, she reached out and took the bag, murmuring a quiet "thank you." He nodded, a slight smile touching his lips. "You should take care of yourself. You have potential, but you cannot survive if you keep going like this. There are people who can help you, if you let them." She looked down at the ground, unsure how to respond. The truth was, she didn't know how to accept help. She had always been alone, and trusting anyone felt impossible. Yet, there was something in his voice that made her pause, something that made her believe, if only slightly. Maybe he meant what he said. Over the next few weeks, he found ways to help her more directly. He arranged for her to have proper meals, a safe place to sleep, and access to basic medical care. Each time he appeared in her life, it was like a lifeline thrown across a stormy sea. She had never known such care, such attention, and at first it frightened her. She had spent so long fending for herself that letting someone in felt dangerous. But slowly, she began to trust him. Realizing that his intentions were genuine, he also began to talk to her, teaching her small lessons about life, opportunity, and the importance of believing in oneself. He spoke not like a teacher, but like someone who had seen the world and understood its harshness. Someone who could guide her through the challenges she faced. At first, she listened quietly, absorbing his words but doubting that they applied to her. How could someone like her ever rise above the life she had been given? Yet, over time, his words began to take root. She started to imagine a life where she was not merely surviving, but thriving. One day he asked her about her dreams, about what she wanted from life. She hesitated, unsure how to answer. She had been dreaming quietly for years, but she had never spoken those dreams aloud, not to anyone. Slowly, she began to share them, the hope of getting an education, of learning new skills, of one day being able to care for herself without fear or dependence. He listened intently, nodding and encouraging her. "Those dreams are possible," he said simply. "You have the strength to achieve them if you are willing to try." The sincerity in his eyes made her believe him, and for the first time in her life she felt that her dreams were not impossible. He helped her enroll in classes that would give her knowledge and skills, arranging for a tutor who could guide her without judgment. She had never been a student in the traditional sense, and at first she struggled, feeling the weight of years spent in survival rather than study. But he encouraged her, reminding her that every small step counted, that progress was made one day at a time. Slowly, she began to learn, her confidence growing with each lesson. Alongside education, he also helped her find safe work opportunities. Jobs that respected her, allowed her to earn her own money, and gave her a sense of accomplishment. She had never known what it felt like to be appreciated for her efforts, to be treated with dignity and respect. These experiences were transformative, teaching her that the world could be different, that not all people sought to harm or exploit her as the weeks turned into months. Her life began to change in ways she had never imagined. She had a stable place to sleep, enough food to eat, and the chance to learn and grow. The constant fear that had once dominated her life began to lessen, replaced by a cautious optimism. She began to see herself not as someone unwanted and rejected, but as someone capable of growth and achievement. Despite these changes, she still carried the scars of her past. Memories of her mother's harsh words, of nights spent alone and hungry, of the constant struggle to survive, lingered. There were moments when doubt and fear crept back in, when the weight of her experiences threatened to overwhelm her. But she had someone in her life now who believed in her, who reminded her of her worth and potential. That belief became a steady anchor, helping her navigate the emotional challenges she faced. One rainy afternoon, she found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought her here. She remembered the countless days spent wandering the streets, the nights spent shivering and alone, and the moments when hope had seemed impossible. She realized that without the intervention of this man, her life might have continued on that same path of struggle and despair. Gratitude filled her quietly, not just for the help he had given, but for the chance to see a different possibility for her life. He had not just saved her from immediate danger, or provided her with material needs. He had shown her a different way to live, a way that included dignity, respect, and opportunity. She began to understand that his support was not just about giving her what she lacked, but about helping her recognize the strength and potential she had always possessed. The realization was both humbling and empowering, reminding her that her past did not define her future. She also noticed changes within herself. She was becoming more confident, more assertive in small ways, and more willing to take risks for her own growth. She had learned to accept help without shame, to embrace opportunities without fear, and to see herself as deserving of care and success. These changes were subtle at first, but they grew steadily, transforming her perspective on life and her place in it. Through it all, the bond between her and the man deepened, built on mutual respect, understanding, and a shared belief in her potential. He never pressured her, never sought to control her, but instead offered guidance and support, allowing her to grow at her own pace. The relationship was one of mentorship, but also of genuine care, and it became a foundation upon which she could rebuild her life. As the months passed, she began to dream more boldly. She imagined a future where she could contribute to the world, where she could help others who were struggling as she once had. She envisioned herself standing strong, independent, and capable, no longer defined by the hardships of her past, but by the resilience she had cultivated. The man's influence had opened doors, but it was her own determination and courage that propelled her forward, even on the hardest days. When doubts resurfaced or obstacles appeared, she remembered the small acts of kindness and encouragement that had changed her path. She remembered the day he handed her that bag, the first moment of genuine care, and the countless lessons and opportunities that followed. These memories became a source of strength, a reminder that transformation was possible, and that life could indeed hold moments of grace and hope by the end of the year. She had achieved milestones she had never thought possible. She had learned new skills, gained knowledge, and developed a sense of self-worth that had been absent for so long. The fear and despair that had once dominated her life had not disappeared entirely, but they were now tempered by confidence, hope, and the tangible evidence that change was real. She had begun to write a new chapter of her life, one filled with possibility and promise. Guided by the unwavering support of someone who saw her true potential and helped her believe in herself for the first time, life was slowly beginning to feel different for her. The days that had once been filled only with struggle and survival now held moments of learning, growth, and even small joys. She was no longer wandering aimlessly through the streets, scavenging for scraps, or hiding from danger. Instead, she had a schedule, a place to go, and a purpose. The lessons she received from her mentor, the man who had intervened in her life, had begun to reshape not only her understanding of the world, but also her view of herself. She had started attending classes regularly, learning skills she had never dreamed of mastering. Mathematics, reading, writing, and practical life skills became part of her daily routine. She struggled at first, fumbling over new concepts and feeling frustrated when she could not keep up. But each day, she pushed herself a little further, reminding herself that every small step was progress. Her confidence began to grow slowly, like the first shoots of a plant breaking through the soil after a long winter. Alongside her education, she had been given opportunities to work in safe and respectful environments. These were not just jobs to earn money. They were lessons in responsibility, independence, and self-respect. She learned to interact with colleagues, manage her time, and complete tasks with diligence. For the first time in her life, she felt that her contributions mattered, that her efforts were recognized and appreciated. This recognition, though simple, was transformative. It helped her shed the years of self-doubt and rejection that had weighed so heavily upon her. Her mentor continued to guide her, but now his role was more about support and advice rather than direct intervention. He encouraged her to explore her own ideas, to trust her instincts, and to take ownership of her decisions. He reminded her that mistakes were part of learning, and that failure did not define her worth. These lessons were sometimes hard to accept, especially for someone who had spent so long living in fear and doubt. But she listened carefully and applied them whenever she could. There were still challenges, of course. People around her often judged her because of her past, treating her with suspicion or disbelief. Some colleagues assumed she would not be capable. Some neighbors whispered about her previous hardships, and sometimes even her own fears resurfaced. But she had learned to stand firm. She reminded herself daily of her achievements, however small, and of the support that had been given to her. Each challenge became a test of her resilience, and she faced them with growing courage. She also began to reconnect with her sense of self. The girl who had once hidden in shadows, who had endured neglect and rejection, was slowly becoming a young woman who knew her value and strength. She explored her interests, finding joy in books, art, and conversation. She began to dream more vividly, imagining a future where she could help others, where she could contribute to society, and where she could live without fear. These dreams gave her a sense of purpose beyond mere survival. Her relationships with others began to improve as well. She found friends who respected her, mentors who guided her, and neighbors who admired her determination. She learned to trust gradually, recognizing that while the world could be cruel, there were also people who were kind and genuine. These connections brought warmth and companionship to her life, filling spaces that had long been empty. Despite these improvements, life was not without setbacks. There were days when she felt overwhelmed, and the weight of her past threatened to drag her down, and when her fears returned unexpectedly. On those days, she leaned on the lessons she had learned, taking a deep breath, reminding herself of her resilience, and moving forward step by step. She began to see that progress was rarely linear, and that patience with herself was as important as the efforts she made externally. Her mentor encouraged her to take on bigger responsibilities, to step outside her comfort zone, She started managing small projects, coordinating tasks, and even helping to guide others who were struggling. These experiences taught her leadership, communication, and the value of empathy. She realized that her past hardships had given her a unique perspective and strength that could be used to help others. She began to feel a sense of pride in what she could accomplish, something that had been foreign to her for most of her life. As her independence grew, she also became more mindful of her health and well-being. She learned to cook nourishing meals, to maintain hygiene, and to rest when needed. Her physical strength improved, and so did her mental clarity. She began to understand that caring for herself was not selfish, but essential for building the life she wanted. Each small act of self-care reinforced her growing belief that she deserved a better life. Opportunities for further growth began to appear. Her mentor introduced her to new people, opening doors to workshops, educational programs, and community initiatives. She embraced these opportunities, recognizing that each one could bring her closer to her dreams. She became more confident in social settings, speaking up, sharing ideas, and asking questions without fear. She discovered a voice within herself that had been suppressed for years, a voice that was strong, thoughtful, and resilient. Her life began to inspire others around her. People who had known her in the past as a struggling girl were now seeing a young woman who was determined, capable, and kind. Her story became a quiet testament to resilience and the impact of genuine support. She realized that by sharing her experiences and helping others, she could create a ripple effect of hope and change in her community. Even with these positive changes, she remained humble. She never forgot the struggles she had endured, the loneliness, hunger, and rejection that had once defined her. These memories served as reminders of her journey, keeping her grounded and compassionate. She understood that her growth was not just about personal success, but also about responsibility, empathy, and the ability to uplift others who were still struggling. She began to set long-term goals for herself. She wanted to complete her education, gain more skills, and eventually create a safe space for other young people like her. She imagined a center where knowledge, care, and opportunity could be provided to those who needed it most. This vision became a driving force, motivating her to continue learning, growing, and pushing beyond her comfort zones. Through all of this, she maintained a close and respectful relationship with her mentor. He never pressured her, always allowing her to make decisions and learn from them. Their bond was built on trust, mutual respect, and a shared belief in her potential. He celebrated her successes and provided guidance during challenges, offering a steady hand without overshadowing her own efforts. This balance of support and autonomy was crucial in helping her develop both confidence and independence. She also began to reflect on her past with a new perspective. The rejection and neglect she had endured were painful, but they had also shaped her into a person with empathy, resilience, and determination. She started to forgive, not for the sake of those who had hurt her, but for herself, allowing her to release some of the anger and bitterness that had lingered for so long. This inner healing was as important as her external achievements, providing emotional strength to sustain her future growth. By the time a year had passed since the beginning of her transformation, she had achieved milestones that once seemed impossible. She had a stable life, meaningful work, growing education, and the confidence to pursue her dreams. The journey had not been easy, but every struggle had strengthened her. She had learned that change was possible, that support could be life-altering, and that hope, no matter how fragile, could lead to real transformation. Her story was no longer just about survival. It had become a story of growth, empowerment, and possibility. She was beginning to shape a life that reflected not the hardships of her past, but the strength, courage, and potential she had cultivated. Each day was an opportunity to learn, to help, and to move closer to the life she had once only dreamed of. And in this new chapter, she was determined to continue building, step by step, toward a future defined not by rejection or fear, but by resilience, hope, and the promise of a better tomorrow. Years had passed since the girl had first been rescued from the harsh streets, yet the memories of her early life were still vivid. She remembered the nights spent shivering under thin blankets. The pangs of hunger that never seemed to leave, and the harsh words that had pierced her heart more deeply than any physical wound. Those experiences had shaped her, forged a resilience and strength that few could understand. And now, as she looked back on her journey, she could see just how far she had come. Her days were no longer consumed by fear and survival. She had a home, modest but safe, where she could rest and feel secure. The walls were warm, adorned with books she had collected over the years, notes from lessons she had learned, and small reminders of the journey that had brought her here. Each item carried a story, a memory of struggle, hope, or triumph, and she cherished them all. They were a testament to the life she had built through determination and the support of those who had believed in her. Education had opened doors she had never thought possible. She had completed courses in practical skills, basic business, and life management, and was now pursuing advanced knowledge in areas that interested her deeply. Understanding of the world had expanded, and with it her confidence. She approached new challenges with a sense of curiosity rather than fear, a stark contrast to the cautious girl she had once been. Every success, no matter how small, reinforced the belief that she was capable of more. Work had become more than a means of survival. It was now a source of pride and fulfillment. She managed projects, coordinated teams, and helped others who were struggling to find their way. Her past gave her a unique perspective. She understood hardship intimately, and that empathy allowed her to guide and support others with sincerity. The people she helped respected her not only for her skills, but for the resilience she had shown in overcoming her own challenges. She had become a role model, quietly inspiring those around her. Despite her accomplishments, she remained humble. She knew that life had been unfair to her in the past, and that luck and support had played roles in her survival. She honored the lessons she had learned by showing kindness whenever possible. She helped neighbors, volunteered in her community, and extended a hand to young people who reminded her of herself. Through these actions, she felt a deep sense of purpose. Her past pain was not wasted, but had become a foundation for positive change in the lives of others. Her mentor, the man who had saved her so many years ago, continued to guide her when needed, though she had long since developed the ability to navigate life on her own. Their relationship had evolved into one of mutual respect, admiration, and enduring gratitude. He never interfered, always offering advice and encouragement without dictating her path. She often reflected on his words, recognizing how his belief in her potential had changed the course of her life. Without his intervention, she might never have experienced the opportunities that had allowed her to grow. She also worked to heal the emotional wounds of her past. Forgiving her mother had been difficult, but over time, she found that letting go of anger allowed her to move forward more freely. She did not forget the pain, but she no longer allowed it to dictate her emotions or choices. She accepted that her early life had been shaped by circumstances beyond her control. And in that acceptance, she found freedom. She could now focus her energy on building a future that reflected her values, dreams, and potential. Her personal growth extended to her relationships as well. She formed friendships built on trust, respect, and shared experiences. She became a confidant to others, someone who could listen without judgment, offer guidance, and provide support. These relationships were different from anything she had known before. They were reciprocal, nurturing, and fulfilling. She realized that healthy connections were possible, that people could care genuinely and deeply, and that she deserved such care. Her dreams expanded as she grew, envisioned a life where she could continue learning, help others, and create opportunities for those who were overlooked by society. She imagined opening a small center where young people could gain education, skills, and support, a place where no one would have to endure the loneliness and neglect she had faced. This vision became a driving force, giving her a sense of direction and purpose beyond personal achievement. Even as her life flourished, she never forgot the lessons of resilience, humility, and perseverance. She faced challenges with courage, knowing that setbacks were part of growth. Financial difficulties, minor health concerns, and the occasional societal prejudice tested her, but she had learned to navigate them with patience and determination. Every obstacle became an opportunity to strengthen her resolve and apply the lessons she had learned over the years. She also found moments of joy and contentment in everyday life. Walking through the streets of her neighborhood, she noticed children laughing, vendors calling out their wares, and neighbors sharing small acts of kindness. These moments reminded her that life was not solely about struggle, but also about connection, beauty, and gratitude. She took time to savor them, understanding that happiness was often found in the small, seemingly ordinary experiences. Her reflection on the past and the growth she had achieved filled her with gratitude. She understood that the intervention of one caring individual had changed her trajectory, but it was her own courage and determination that had allowed her to seize those opportunities. She felt pride in her achievements, not arrogance, but a quiet recognition of the strength she had cultivated. Her life was now a testament to the possibility of transformation. Hope and resilience. The community began to notice her impact. People spoke of her quietly, admiring the way she had risen above adversity, the kindness she showed, and the support she offered to others. She became a symbol of hope, an example that even the most overlooked individuals could change their lives when given guidance, opportunity, and belief. This recognition was not the goal, but it reinforced her sense of responsibility to continue her work and inspire positive change. She also embraced personal growth in ways that went beyond education and work. She nurtured her creativity, exploring art, writing, and other forms of expression. These outlets allowed her to process emotions, celebrate achievements, and communicate experiences that had long been silenced. Through these expressions, she found not only joy, but also a deeper connection to herself and her journey. Over time, she became an advocate for others who faced challenges similar to those she had endured. She spoke quietly in community meetings, offered mentorship to youth, and helped organize programs to provide education and resources. She did not seek recognition, but her work resonated widely, touching lives in ways she had never imagined. The girl who had once been rejected and overlooked was now a beacon of hope, quietly transforming her community one life at a time. In private moments, she reflected on how far she had come. She remembered the girl who had shivered in the cold, who had gone hungry, and who had felt invisible in a world that seemed indifferent. She acknowledged the pain of that past, but celebrated the resilience that had carried her through. She realized that her journey was not just a personal victory, but a story of the transformative power of kindness, its opportunity, and belief. Her life had become a cycle of giving and growth. She received guidance and support when she needed it, and now extended the same to others. She understood the importance of lifting others as she had been lifted, creating a ripple effect that extended far beyond herself. Every action, no matter how small, became part of a larger tapestry of hope and change. Through it all, she never lost sight of the lessons that had carried her forward. Patience, courage, empathy, and determination remained guiding principles. She knew that life would continue to present challenges, but she now faced them with confidence. Supported by the skills, knowledge, and resilience she had cultivated, her past was no longer a source of limitation, but a foundation for strength and insight as she looked toward the future. She envisioned a life of continued growth, contribution, and fulfillment. She wanted to expand her knowledge, deepen her connections, and help more people achieve stability, education, and confidence. She understood that the journey was ongoing, that learning and giving were lifelong pursuits, and she embraced this understanding with gratitude and excitement. Her story was now one of transformation, hope, and empowerment. She had moved from being invisible and rejected to being recognized, respected, and valued. She had discovered her own strength, learned to trust, and created opportunities for herself and others. And most importantly, she had learned that even the most difficult beginnings did not define one's destiny. With courage, support, and determination, life could be reshaped, and dreams could be realized. In the quiet moments when she paused to reflect, she felt a deep sense of peace. She had survived, she had grown, and she had begun to thrive. The girl who had once been pushed away as not mine was now a woman who had reclaimed her life, transformed her circumstances, and inspired others along the way. Her journey was a testament to the power of resilience, the importance of support, and the enduring strength of the human spirit. And with that knowledge, she faced each new day with hope, purpose, and the unwavering belief that the best was still to come.